This is Megaera, or Meg, from the video game Hades. She's always been one of my favorite characters in the game. I really like the high contrast that she has, these vibrant colors contrasted with the dark blue. And I was very excited when someone finally commissioned me to make this character and I got to take a stab at it. I went back and forth a bit with my patron trying to settle on a background, and I had this idea of having her framed with the doorway that leads to your encounter with her in the game. And he had this idea of her standing in the blood pool, the kind of iconic resurrection blood pool from the game. I thought that was a really cool idea, so I kind of combined those two. And then I didn't want to just have a black background, so I decided to do Tartarus in the doorway behind her. And I tried to keep the background kind of vague compared to her, right? I wanted really clean, sharp lines, high contrast, so that her character really comes forward. And then, the background has more of like an illustrated, almost impression look to it. Like with Tartarus, I wanted to create sort of the idea and the impression of buildings without getting too crazy and hung up on the details. I didn't want it to be too busy and detract from her character. And again, with the doorway, fortunately, in the original art, it has a sort of illustrated look to it. So I was able to stay true to the original art, and it just worked well for this piece. These cracks, by the way, these are intentional. These are in the original art, and they also allowed me to break the glass into manageable sections. My kiln is an 11-inch kiln, so I couldn't have giant 30-inch pieces of glass in there. So these natural breaks that are in the art allowed me to break the glass into manageable pieces. I had to put these in the kiln because obviously there's paint elements involved here. Now, to be clear, the paint that I used is only black paint. All the color that you see is the natural color of the glass. And it's a paint called vitreous paint. It's actually made from glass that has been ground down to a fine powder. And then you mix that with liquid. I use either water or propylene glycol and turn that into a paint. That gets painted on, and then that piece of glass is fired in the kiln so that the surface of the glass melts and the glass powder in that paint fuses permanently with the glass. It becomes a permanent part of the glass. It's an ancient technique. It takes a lot of work, but I really like the final results. So most of these pieces have been painted a couple of times. You can see how there's different shades. And I was really trying to go for that sort of comic book look that Hades has to its art style, the sort of cell shading. So there's only a few different tones of shading. So in this case, for example, you have I cut this piece of glass. This is kind of the shape of it. You can kind of see the solder line. So this is one piece of yellow glass, yellow transparent glass. And then I did some of the line work with that black vitreous paint, and then I did the high contrast shadows, and then fired that in the kiln. Once that cooled off and was ready, I did another pass with just very light application of that paint so that I could have this second tone. And what I do there is I paint pretty much the whole thing. I let that paint dry, and then I use a bamboo skewer like I'm holding now, and I scratch away that dried paint to create these highlights, and then fire that in the kiln. So I use that technique on pretty much all of the painted elements. Like here, this is the natural color of the gray glass, and then that light shading, and then that high contrast black shading. So that's in the gold work, it's on her skin, it's in her hair. You can see the multiple layers of shading in her face. Most of the elements here I used that technique to get that comic book look to her. I'm really happy with some of these detailed elements and how these came out. It was a little tricky trying to cut these pieces to fit perfectly in there. Here in her earring, these gold and light blue triangles, cutting those to fit. Her eyes obviously were extremely difficult, these tiny yellow pieces. It was really important to me that her eyes looked striking. Even from a distance, I wanted that yellow to come through. So I wanted to use a different glass, and I wanted transparent glass so that that brightness really shines through. And this jewel in her headband, by the way, this is actually amethyst. I did source an amethyst cabochon, did a little bit of grinding to get it to fit. I don't know if it really does anything aesthetically, but I just kind of find it satisfying to know that there's an actual crystal in there. And that's actually something I'm going to try to incorporate into more of my work, using more minerals along with the glass. I really like this whip down here. Again, you have the alternating yellows and blues with the gold, and I think this really captures that comic book illustrated sort of look. Like it's something you look at and you wouldn't immediately know that this is stained glass. I had to be pretty conscious of the types of glass that I used. I went with mostly transparent glass, like the light blue of her hair, and this gold glass. This is actually very transparent. If I put my hand behind the glass, you'd see it very clearly. As opposed to like this, which is sort of a more traditional wispy, opalescent sort of look, because I wanted the color to be flat and smooth and consistent. I did go with wispy glass for her outfit, for the blue, because I wanted the wispiness of the glass to really represent the flow of cloth. So we have like a flow coming this way. I try to line it so that there's sort of a flow around the contours of her figure, and then sort of a vertical flow with her legs. So it kind of gives that impression of cloth. And then the streaky with the door frame, it not only just looks nice, but it also just kind of reminds you at a glance that this is in fact stained glass, because a lot of it is more flat colors, and it might not even be obvious that what you're looking at is stained glass, which is part of what I was going for. This is in a frame. I've dyed it red oak, or stained it red oak, and there's an LED light box that I built behind this so that it can just be hung on a wall. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a window. There's a little magnetic catch here. I'll give you a little peek inside. There's the LED strips, some reflective foil tape, and then I've got diffusion paper behind the glass to kind of spread the light out. It was also important to me that she look good even when she's not illuminated, because obviously that's going to be the case sometimes. So let's go ahead and unplug this so you can kind of see. I think even without being lit, I think it's still just a nice piece of art to have on the wall. You can still get all those details. In some ways you get some interesting effects with the wispiness and the pillars, even with the lights off. And then of course the whole thing comes to life when you light it up and really let those colors pop through. If you'd like to commission a piece, message us through our Etsy store at the web address in the description below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and visit us at our website at jupiter-glass.com.